The distant cry of a lone coyote broke the stillness of the Montana night as Rose Remington stared at the small bundle sleeping in her arms, her heart aching with both love and despair. The year was 1875, and the small mining town of Silver Creek was no place for a widow with a newborn son, especially one whose husband had died before even knowing he would be a father. The flickering light of the oil lamp cast long shadows across the worn wooden floor of her small cabin. 6 weeks had passed since she'd given birth to little Thomas, named after his father who'd perished in a mining accident just 7 months prior. The gold Tom had been so certain they'd find had turned out to be nothing but fool's gold, leaving Rose with nothing but debts and a baby on the way. Rose gently placed Thomas in his cradle, a simple wooden box that the town carpenter had fashioned as a gift of sympathy. She moved to the window, gazing out at the main street of Silver Creek. The saloon was still lit up, piano music drifting through the night air. Men would be gambling away their earnings while women in colorful dresses served drinks and offered companionship for a price. She'd resisted Sheriff Walton's not-so-subtle suggestions that she could find work there. "A pretty young thing like you would make good money," he'd said with a gleam in his eye that made her skin crawl. She was 22, alone, and desperate, but not that desperate. Not yet. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. It was well past 9 in the evening, and visitors at this hour were rare. Cautiously, she grabbed the small revolver Tom had insisted she learn to use and approached the door. "Who's there?" she called, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's Dr. Patterson, Mrs. Remington. I've brought the medicine for the baby." Relief flooded through her as she unlatched the door. Dr. Patterson was one of the few genuinely kind people in Silver Creek. The elderly physician stepped inside, medical bag in hand. "How is young Thomas doing?" he asked, placing his hat on the table. "Better, I think. His fever broke this afternoon." The doctor nodded and moved to examine the sleeping infant. "You were right to send for me when you did. Croup can be dangerous in one so young." He pulled a small bottle from his bag. 2 drops in the morning and evening for the next 3 days. Rose bit her lip. "About your payment," the doctor waved away her concern. "We can discuss that when Thomas is fully recovered. Dr. Patterson, you've been more than patient. Between the delivery and now this." Her voice cracked. "I don't know when I'll be able to pay." The older man's eyes softened. "Your husband was a good man, Rose. Everyone in town respected him." "Respect doesn't pay debts," she said quietly. "Mr. Thornton came by yesterday. He says if I can't make payment on the cabin by the end of the month, he'll have to find new tenants." Dr. Patterson sighed. "Thornton is a businessman first and foremost. However," he added, a thoughtful expression crossing his face, "I may have a solution to your predicament." Rose felt a flicker of hope. "What kind of solution?" "The Henderson Ranch about 10 miles east of town is looking for a cook and housekeeper. The pay is modest, but includes room and board for you and the baby." Her heart sank slightly. "But I've never worked on a ranch." "It's honest work, Rose. And Klaus Henderson runs a respectable operation. His wife passed about 2 years ago, and he's been struggling to keep the house in order while managing the ranch. He's got a couple of hands who help with the cattle, but none who can cook worth a damn, if you'll pardon my language." Rose glanced at her sleeping son. "I don't have much choice, do I?" "There are always choices," Dr. Patterson said gently. "But some are better than others." The next morning dawned clear and bright. Rose had spent a restless night weighing her options, which were pitifully few. By first light, she'd made her decision. She packed their meager belongings, some clothes, a photograph of Tom, her wedding ring which she couldn't bear to sell, and a few essentials into a single trunk. Dr. Patterson arrived promptly at 8 with a borrowed wagon and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He helped her load the trunk and then carefully placed the cradle in the back, securing it with rope so it wouldn't shift during the journey. "Are you certain about this, Rose?" he asked as he assisted her onto the wagon seat, Thomas bundled securely in her arms. "No," she admitted, "but I'm certain about what will happen if I stay." The journey to the Henderson Ranch took nearly 3 hours. The terrain grew increasingly wild as they left town behind, with rolling hills covered in tall grasses and scattered pine trees. The road, little more than a rutted trail in places, wound alongside a creek that Dr. Patterson said eventually fed into the Missouri River. "The Henderson place lies just beyond that ridge," the doctor said, pointing ahead. Klaus's father established it back in 47, before Montana was even a territory. As they crested the hill, Rose got her first look at what might become her new home. The ranch sprawled across a picturesque valley, with a substantial log house at its center, flanked by a large barn, several outbuildings, and corrals containing horses and cattle. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, suggesting someone was home. Dr. Patterson guided the wagon down the slope toward the ranch house. As they approached, a tall figure emerged from the barn, shading his eyes against the midday sun. "That's Klaus now," the doctor said quietly. Rose studied the man who might become her employer. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, with broad shoulders and a strong build evident even from a distance. As they drew closer, she could make out more details: dark brown hair beneath a well-worn cowboy hat, a clean-shaven face weathered by the elements, and clothing that was practical rather than fashionable. Klaus Henderson approached the wagon with a measured stride. His expression was guarded but not unfriendly. "Doc," he greeted, nodding to the physician. His gaze shifted to Rose, curiosity evident in eyes that she now saw were a striking shade of blue. "This must be Mrs. Remington." "Indeed it is," Dr. Patterson replied. "Rose, this is Klaus Henderson." "Madam," Klaus said, tipping his hat slightly. His voice was deep with a slight accent she couldn't quite place. "German, perhaps." "Mr. Henderson," she acknowledged, suddenly nervous about the impression she was making. Thomas chose that moment to fuss, drawing the rancher's attention. "And who might this little one be?" he asked, his expression softening slightly. "My son, Thomas. He's 6 weeks old." Klaus nodded, then glanced at Dr. Patterson. "You mentioned she was recently widowed?" "Yes, Tom Remington. Died in that cave-in at the Silver Ridge mine last fall." A flash of recognition crossed Klaus's face. "I remember hearing about that. Terrible business." He turned back to Rose. "Doc says you're looking for work." "Yes, sir. I can cook, clean, and sew. I'm a quick learner for anything else you might need." Klaus studied her for a moment. "Ranch life isn't easy, Mrs. Remington, especially with a young one." "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Henderson." The rancher seemed to consider this, then gestured toward the house. "Come inside. We can discuss terms." Dr. Patterson helped Rose down from the wagon. Thomas had fallen back asleep, his tiny face peaceful despite the upheaval in their lives. They followed Klaus to the house, a substantial structure built of thick logs with a wide covered porch wrapping around the front. The interior was surprisingly spacious, with a large main room that served as both parlor and dining area. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, while a long table capable of seating at least 8 people occupied the center of the room. The furnishings were sturdy and practical, though Rose noted with surprise that there were bookshelves filled with volumes, suggesting Klaus Henderson was more than just a simple cattleman. "Coffee," Klaus offered, moving toward a large cast iron stove in the adjacent kitchen area. "Please," Rose answered, taking a seat at the table while carefully cradling Thomas. As Klaus busied himself with the coffee, Dr. Patterson cleared his throat. "I should mention that Mrs. Remington is in something of a precarious situation financially. Her late husband's mining investments didn't pan out as hoped." Klaus returned with 3 mugs of coffee, setting one before Rose. "I'm sorry to hear that. Mining's a risky business." "Tom was certain he'd struck a rich vein," Rose said softly. "He died believing he'd secured our future." "And instead left you with debts," Klaus observed, his directness catching her off guard. "Yes," she admitted. "Which is why I need this position, Mr. Henderson." The rancher took a sip of his coffee, regarding her thoughtfully. "The job pays $15 a month, plus room and board for you and your son. Duties include cooking 3 meals daily, cleaning, laundry, and general household management. Sundays are yours unless there's an emergency. Does that sound agreeable?" The terms were more generous than Rose had expected. "Yes, very much so. There's a room off the kitchen that was originally meant for a housekeeper. It's small but should accommodate you and the baby. You can start tomorrow if that suits." Rose glanced at Dr. Patterson, who gave an encouraging nod. "That would be fine, thank you." "Good." Klaus rose from his seat. "I'll have Jack and Emmett bring in your things. They're my hands, Jack Tanner and Emmett Collins. They bunk in the room above the stable." He paused, then added, "I should warn you that they've been living on my poor cooking and their own worst attempts for 2 years now." They may propose marriage within a week just for your cooking. A small smile tugged at Rose's lips despite her nerves. I'll consider myself warned. Later, after Dr. Patterson had departed with promises to check on her and Thomas in a week's time, Rose found herself alone in the small room that would be their new home. It was indeed modest, just large enough for a bed, a small dresser, and now Thomas's cradle, but it was clean and warm, with a window overlooking a kitchen garden that had seen better days. Thomas was awake, his dark eyes seemingly taking in their new surroundings. "Well, little one," she whispered, "it's just you and me now. We're going to make the best of this, I promise." A knock at the door drew her attention. Klaus stood there, holding a wooden box. "Mrs. Remington, I found this in the attic. My late wife stored some baby things there when we thought." He stopped, a flash of pain crossing his features. "Anyway, there are some blankets and clothes that might be useful for Thomas." Rose was touched by the gesture. "Thank you. That's very kind." Klaus set the box down just inside the door. "Supper's in an hour. Nothing fancy tonight, I'm afraid. Just beans and biscuits. I'll take over cooking duties first thing tomorrow." He nodded and turned to leave, then hesitated. "Mrs. Remington, I'm sorry about your husband. This isn't the same as having him here with you, but I hope you and Thomas can find some peace at the ranch." With that, he was gone, leaving Rose to wonder about the man whose home she would now share. The following days established a routine that, while demanding, gave Rose purpose beyond mere survival. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Klaus and his two ranch hands, Jack, a taciturn older man with a limp from an old riding accident, and Emmett, barely 20 and full of boisterous energy. Both men were respectful, if somewhat awkward around her and the baby. Klaus proved to be a fair employer. He expected work to be done properly, but wasn't unreasonable in his demands. He spoke little about himself, though Rose gradually learned that he'd come to America as a child with his parents from Bavaria. His father had established the ranch after trying his hand at various trades, finally finding success with cattle. Pa had a gift with animals. Klaus explained one evening as they sat on the porch after supper, Thomas sleeping peacefully in Rose's arms. Could gentle the meanest bull or the wildest horse? Me. I had to learn the hard way. He rolled up his sleeve to reveal a jagged scar running from elbow to wrist. "First horse I tried to break nearly took my arm off." "Yet you still work with them," Rose observed. A rare smile crossed his face. "Some things are worth the risk." 3 weeks into her employment, Rose was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard the thunder of hooves approaching. 3 riders appeared over the ridge, heading toward the ranch at a gallop. Klaus emerged from the barn, rifle in hand, his posture alert. "Get inside," he called to Rose. "Take Thomas and lock the door." She didn't question the order, rushing to gather Thomas from his basket near the clothesline and hurrying into the house. Through the window, she watched as Klaus stood his ground, Jack and Emmett flanking him with their own weapons at the ready. The riders slowed as they approached, and Rose recognized the center figure with a jolt of fear: Sheriff Walton from Silver Creek, accompanied by 2 men she didn't know. "Henderson," Walton called out, reining in his horse. "Need a word with you and the widow Remington." Klaus didn't lower his rifle. "State your business, Sheriff." "Got a complaint from Edwin Thornton about unpaid rent and abandonment of property. Says Mrs. Remington left town without settling her debts." Rose felt her heart sink. She'd written to Mr. Thornton explaining her situation and promising to send payment from her first wages, but evidently, that wasn't good enough. Before she could think better of it, she stepped onto the porch, still holding Thomas. "Sheriff Walton, I told Mr. Thornton I would pay what I owe as soon as I received my wages." Klaus glanced back at her, his expression unreadable, before turning back to the sheriff. "How much does she owe?" $12 rent, plus another 8 for damages to the property," Walton replied, a smug smile playing at his lips. "Damages?" Rose exclaimed. "There were no damages when I left. Broken window, kicked in door," the sheriff drawled. "Thornton had to repair them after you vacated." "That's a lie." Her indignation overcame her fear. "The cabin was in perfect order when Dr. Patterson and I left." Klaus lowered his rifle slightly. "I'll pay the 12 for the rent. The supposed damages can wait until Mrs. Remington can return to town to verify them." Walton's smile faded. "Thornton wants the full amount, Henderson. $20, or the woman comes back to town to face charges." Charges. Klaus's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. For what crime exactly? Theft, property damage, abandonment of contractual obligations. Walton listed, though Rose noted he seemed less certain now. Interesting. I wasn't aware leaving town was a crime in Montana territory. Klaus gestured to Jack. Get $20 from the strongbox. Klaus, you don't have to, Rose began. I'll deduct it from your wages over time, he said quietly, not looking at her. No interest. Jack returned moments later with the money, which Klaus handed to the sheriff. This settles Mrs. Remington's debt in full. I trust you'll provide a receipt. Walton pocketed the money with obvious disappointment. Didn't take you for the type to be swayed by a pretty face, Henderson. I'm not swayed by much these days, Sheriff. Certainly not by men who harass widows and invent crimes to line their pockets. Klaus raised his rifle again, just slightly. I think we're done here. The sheriff's face darkened, but he seemed to think better of pushing the issue. With a curt nod, he turned his horse. Good day, Henderson. Mrs. Remington. They watched in silence as the three men rode away. Only when they disappeared over the ridge did Klaus lower his weapon completely. He turned to Rose, his expression grave. You should have told me about the debt. I was handling it, she said defensively. I wrote to Mr. Thornton explaining my situation. Men like Thornton and Walton don't care about explanations. They care about power and money. He ran a hand through his hair, dislodging his hat. Next time you have trouble, tell me. That's not a request, Mrs. Remington. The sternness in his voice stung. I don't need a guardian, Mr. Henderson. I need employment so I can support my son and myself. And I need a housekeeper who doesn't bring trouble to my ranch, he countered. If there are other creditors likely to come calling, I should know about it. Rose felt tears threatening, but refused to let them fall. There aren't. The rent was the only outstanding debt. Klaus studied her face as if trying to determine if she was being truthful. Finally, he nodded. Good. Now, I believe we were due for stew tonight. The abrupt change of subject caught her off guard. Yes, it's already simmering. Excellent. He retrieved his hat from the ground, dusted it off, and placed it back on his head. I'll be in the north pasture checking fences until supper. Rose watched him stride toward the corral where his horse waited, his shoulders rigid with tension. Despite his gruff manner, he'd just protected her and Thomas from a potentially devastating situation. The realization left her feeling both grateful and strangely vulnerable. That night, after Thomas was asleep and the men had retired, Rose sat at the kitchen table with paper and pencil, calculating how long it would take to repay Klaus at $2 per month from her wages. The prospect of being indebted to him for nearly a year was disheartening. A noise at the door made her look up. Klaus stood there, a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses in hand. May I join you? He asked. Rose nodded, hastily setting aside her calculations. Of course. He placed the glasses on the table and poured a modest amount into each. You look like you could use this after today's excitement. Thank you. She accepted the glass, but didn't immediately drink. Mr. Henderson, about the money, Klaus, he interrupted. If we're going to be sharing whiskey in the middle of the night, you might as well use my given name. A small smile tugged at her lips. Klaus, then. And I'm Rose. He raised his glass slightly. Rose. They sipped in companionable silence for a moment before Rose spoke again. I want to thank you for what you did today, and I want to assure you I'll repay every cent. I know you will. He twisted his glass thoughtfully. But perhaps we can come to a different arrangement. Rose tensed slightly. What kind of arrangement? Klaus must have noticed her wariness because he quickly added, nothing improper. I was thinking you might expand your duties to include the kitchen garden. It's been neglected since my wife died, but with proper tending, it could provide vegetables for the ranch and perhaps even enough to sell in town. And my share of the proceeds would go toward the debt. Rose clarified. Exactly. You'd clear the debt faster, and we'd all eat better. I'd provide the seeds and tools, of course. It was a generous offer, and one that would allow her to maintain her dignity. I accept. Though I should warn you, my experience with gardening is limited. There are books in the study that might help. My wife was quite the gardener in her time. A shadow crossed his face at the mention of his late wife. May I ask about her? Rose ventured carefully. Klaus took another sip of whiskey before answering. Her name was Anna. We married 8 years ago. She was the daughter of a rancher from the next county. He paused, his gaze distant. She died in childbirth 2 years ago. The baby too. A boy. I'm so sorry, Rose said softly, understanding now his earlier hesitation when offering her the box of baby things. It was a hard time, he acknowledged. I considered selling the ranch afterward, but this was her home too. Leaving felt like losing her twice. Rose understood that feeling all too well. After Tom died, I couldn't bear to part with anything of his, even though selling his things might have helped with the debts. Klaus nodded, a silent acknowledgement of their shared grief. How did you meet your husband? At a town social in Idaho. I was visiting my aunt. Tom was passing through on his way to Montana Territory, chasing rumors of gold. She smiled at the memory. He asked me to dance 3 times that night and proposed a week later. My parents thought I was mad to accept, but I was 19 and in love with his dreams as much as with him. And you followed him here. 2 months after we married. He'd found a claim he was certain would make us rich. She shook her head ruefully. We lived in a tent at first, until winter drove us into town. Tom worked the claim during the day and took odd jobs at night. He was convinced the big strike was just one more dig away. Prospectors often are, Klaus observed without judgment. When I found out I was expecting, he was overjoyed. Started building plans for a proper house with a nursery and a garden for me. Her voice caught. He died 3 weeks later, and never knew he had a son. Klaus finished quietly. Rose nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When she recovered, she asked, "What about you? Any family besides your parents?" My father passed 10 years ago, mother soon after. No siblings, just me and this ranch. He finished his whiskey. And now 2 ranch hands, a housekeeper, and a baby who can cry loud enough to wake the dead when he's hungry. Rose laughed softly. He does have impressive lungs. Like his mother when she's standing up to the sheriff, Klaus remarked, a hint of admiration in his voice. Their conversation continued well into the night, moving from personal histories to more mundane topics: the cattle market, the harsh Montana winters, the latest book Klaus had ordered from back east. By the time they parted ways, Rose felt she understood her employer better, and perhaps he understood her too. Spring gave way to summer, and with it came changes to the ranch and its inhabitants. The kitchen garden flourished under Rose's care, yielding far more produce than the household could consume. True to his word, Klaus arranged for her to sell the excess in town, with her portion of the proceeds applied to her debt. By July, it was nearly cleared. Thomas grew stronger daily, his chubby legs kicking with enthusiasm during his baths, his laughter bringing smiles to even taciturn Jack's face. To Rose's surprise, it was Klaus who spent the most time with the baby, often holding him in the evenings while Rose prepared supper or finished household chores. "He likes the sound of your voice," Rose remarked one evening, finding Klaus on the porch reading aloud from a book of poetry to a captivated Thomas. "Tennyson is good for the soul," Klaus replied with mock seriousness. "Never too early to appreciate fine literature." Rose smiled, noticing how natural Thomas looked in Klaus's strong arms. "You're good with him. He makes it easy," Klaus said, his gaze softening as he looked down at the baby. "He's got your eyes, you know." The observation caught Rose off guard. It was true Thomas had inherited her hazel eyes rather than Tom's blue ones. But it was the way Klaus said it, with a tenderness that seemed to encompass both mother and child, that made her heart beat a little faster. As July turned to August, the first signs of autumn began to appear: cooler mornings, earlier sunsets, and the changing colors of the distant mountains. The cattle would soon need to be moved to lower pastures before winter set in. "We'll be busy with the roundup soon," Klaus mentioned at breakfast one morning. "I've hired 3 extra hands to help. They'll stay in the bunkhouse with Jack and Emmett. I'll prepare extra food," Rose assured him. "How long will the roundup take?" "About 2 weeks, depending on weather." He hesitated. "I've been meaning to ask, will you and Thomas stay through the winter? I know we didn't discuss terms beyond the summer months." The question took Rose by surprise. She'd been so focused on her day-to-day responsibilities that she hadn't thought much about the future. I hadn't considered leaving," she admitted. Relief flashed across Klaus's face. "Good. The ranch needs you. Both of you." There was something in his tone that suggested he wasn't just talking about her cooking and cleaning skills. Before she could respond, Thomas let out a wail from his basket near the stove, demanding his own breakfast. "Duty calls," Rose said with a smile, moving to attend to her son. Klaus nodded, rising from the table. I'll be in the south pasture if you need anything. He paused at the door. Rose? I'm glad you're staying. As he left, Rose felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the kitchen fire. In the 5 months since coming to the Henderson ranch, something had shifted between them, a cautious friendship evolving into something more complex. She wasn't ready to put a name to it yet, but she couldn't deny the way her pulse quickened when he entered a room, or how she found herself looking forward to their evening conversations after the day's work was done. The roundup began the following week, bringing with it a flurry of activity. The ranch house became a hub of constant movement, with men coming and going at all hours, meals served in shifts, and the sounds of cattle and horses never far away. Rose barely saw Klaus except at mealtimes, and even then, he was often distracted by ranch business. On the 10th day of the roundup, a violent storm blew in from the north, bringing driving rain and fierce winds. The cattle grew restless, making the cowboys' jobs more dangerous. Rose spent the day worrying, jumping at every sound that might signal someone's return to the ranch house. It was well past midnight when she heard horses in the yard. Wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, she hurried to the front door just as Klaus and 2 other riders dismounted. Even in the dim light from the porch lantern, she could see Klaus was injured, his right arm held stiffly against his side. What happened? She asked, moving to help him up the steps. Spooked steer caught me off guard, he grunted. Might have a cracked rib or two. Rose helped him inside, while the other men led the horses to the barn. She eased him into a chair by the fire, which she'd kept burning despite the late hour. Let me see. Klaus winced as she carefully helped him remove his rain-soaked coat and shirt. An ugly bruise was already forming across his right side, and when she gently probed the area, he sucked in a sharp breath. Definitely bruised ribs, possibly cracked, Rose concluded. You need to stay still for a few days. Can't, he protested. The roundup, we'll have to continue without you, she interrupted firmly. Unless you want to puncture a lung and leave this ranch without its owner. He looked like he wanted to argue further, but instead slumped back in the chair. You're as stubborn as Anna was. I'll take that as a compliment, Rose replied, moving to heat water and gather bandages. Over the next few days, Klaus was forced to direct ranch operations from the house while his ribs healed. The arrangement brought them into closer proximity than ever before, with Rose tending to his injury and Klaus entertaining Thomas during the times he couldn't sleep due to pain. On the 4th evening after his injury, Rose found Klaus sitting in the parlor with Thomas on his lap, telling the baby a story about his grandfather's journey from Bavaria to America. And so your great-grandfather, well, not by blood, but in spirit perhaps crossed the entire ocean with nothing but a trunk of clothes and dreams of a better life. Klaus tickled Thomas gently under the chin, earning a delighted gurgle. Just like you and your mama came here with not much more than hope and courage. Rose remained in the doorway, unnoticed, her heart swelling with an emotion she'd been trying to deny for weeks. Klaus continued his tale, his voice gentle in a way she'd never heard him speak to adults. Your papa would be proud of you, little man. And your mama too. She's the strongest person I know, carrying on for your sake, making a home for you in difficult circumstances. Thomas reached up to pat Klaus's bearded cheek, causing the rancher to smile. Yes, I agree. She's pretty too. But don't tell her I said so, or she might get ideas. What kind of ideas? Rose asked softly, unable to remain silent any longer. Klaus started, then winced as the movement jarred his injured ribs. How long have you been standing there? Long enough. She moved into the room, sitting in the chair opposite him. You're good with him. He's easy to be good with, Klaus replied, echoing his words from weeks earlier. Rose watched as Thomas nestled contentedly against Klaus's chest, his small hand gripping the rancher's finger. The sight brought an ache to her throat. He needs a father, she said quietly. Klaus looked up, his expression suddenly vulnerable. And what do you need, Rose? The question hung between them, loaded with possibility. I want someone who sees Thomas and me as more than obligations or employees. Someone who might grow to love us both in time. Klaus's gaze held hers, unwavering. I think that someone might already be halfway there. Rose felt tears prickling behind her eyes. Klaus, I don't want your pity. He looked genuinely surprised. Rose, what I feel for you and Thomas is about as far from pity as the East is from the West. Then what is it? He shifted Thomas gently in his arms. When Anna died, I thought that part of me died too, the part capable of caring deeply for another person. I was existing, not living, until you arrived with this little fellow. He glanced down at Thomas, who had fallen asleep against his chest. You brought life back to this ranch, and to me. Rose's heart hammered in her chest. Are you saying? I'm saying that I care for you both, deeply. More than I thought possible after losing Anna. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I don't expect you to feel the same way. It's barely been a year since your husband passed. But I want you to know that if you chose to stay here, it wouldn't just be as my housekeeper. The tears she'd been holding back spilled over. Klaus, a sharp cry from outside interrupted her response. Klaus tensed, his expression immediately alert. Take Thomas, he said, carefully transferring the baby to Rose's arms. He stood, grimacing at the pain in his ribs, and moved to the window. Riders coming in fast. Rose clutched Thomas protectively. The roundup crew? No, different direction. Klaus moved to the fireplace and lifted his rifle from its rack above the mantel. Get to your room and lock the door. Klaus now rose. The urgency in his voice propelled her into motion. She hurried to her room off the kitchen, locking the door as instructed. Through the small window, she could see 4 riders approaching the house, their horses lathered from hard riding. In the dim moonlight, she recognized one figure immediately, Sheriff Walton. Heart pounding, she pressed her ear to the door that connected her room to the kitchen, straining to hear what was happening. She could make out Klaus's deep voice, followed by the sheriff's higher, more nasal tone, but couldn't distinguish the words. The conversation seemed to go on forever. Rose paced the small room, trying to keep Thomas calm while her own nerves were stretched to the breaking point. Finally, she heard the front door close and boots on the porch steps. A gentle knock on her door made her jump. Rose? It's me. She unlocked the door with trembling fingers. Klaus stood there, his expression grim. What did they want? Walton claims there's been a bank robbery in Silver Creek. Says the description of one of the robbers matches Jack. Jack? Rose was incredulous. That's absurd. He's been here the entire time, working the roundup. I told them as much. They're headed to the south pasture to verify with the other hands. Klaus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Rose had come to recognize as a sign of frustration. Walton's using this as an excuse. He's still sore about our last encounter. Will they arrest Jack? Not if I can help it. I've sent Emmett to ride ahead and warn the men. He sighed heavily. Rose, there's something else. Walton mentioned that Edwin Thornton is claiming you stole items from the cabin before leaving supposedly valuable silverware that belonged to his wife. That's a lie, Rose exclaimed. I never had any silverware, valuable or otherwise. Everything I owned is here. I believe you, Klaus assured her. But Thornton's influential in town, and Walton seems determined to make trouble for anyone connected to this ranch. Rose sank onto her bed, still holding Thomas, who had, miraculously, remained asleep through the commotion. What will we do? Klaus knelt before her, wincing slightly at the movement. I was thinking we might consider making this arrangement more permanent. She blinked, uncertain if she'd understood correctly. What do you mean? I mean, Klaus said, taking her free hand in his, that I care for you and Thomas more than I thought possible. I know it's sudden, and perhaps improper given you're still in mourning, but I'm not, Rose interrupted softly. Not what? Still in mourning. Not truly. She looked down at their joined hands. I love Tom, and I'll always honor his memory as Thomas's father. But these past months with you, I've felt things I never expected to feel again. Hope dawned in Klaus's eyes. Rose, are you saying? I'm saying that Thomas and I have found a home here. With you. She squeezed his hand. But I won't live under a cloud of suspicion or threats from men like Walton and Thornton. Nor should you. Klaus took a deep breath. Rose Remington, I'm asking if you would consider becoming my wife. Not just for protection from Walton's schemes, though that would be a benefit, but because I believe we could build something good together, you, me, and Thomas. Rose felt tears welling again, but this time from joy rather than distress. Are you certain? Taking on another man's child, Thomas would be my son in every way that matters. Klaus said firmly. I already love him as if he were my own. The simple declaration broke something open in Rose's heart. And me? Klaus's expression softened. You, Rose Remington, have brought light back into my life when I thought I'd live in shadows forever. I didn't expect to love again after Anna, but here we are. Here we are, she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas stirred in her arms, blinking sleepily up at them. Klaus reached out to stroke the baby's cheek with gentle fingers. What do you say, little man? Would you like me to be your pa? As if understanding the question, Thomas grabbed Klaus's finger and gurgled happily. Rose laughed through her tears. I think that's a yes. Klaus smiled. Then his expression grew serious again. Rose, I need to hear it from you. Will you marry me? Not just for safety or convenience, but because you might come to love me too, in time. Rose leaned forward, careful of Thomas between them, and pressed her lips gently to Klaus's. I don't need time, she whispered against his mouth. I already do. The sound of hoofbeats returning jolted them apart. Klaus stood, moving to the window. Walton and his men. And they've got Jack with them. Fear gripped Rose anew. They're arresting him? But he's innocent. Stay here, Klaus instructed, retrieving his rifle. I'll handle this. Rose watched through the window as Klaus strode out to meet the returning party. Jack sat on his horse, hands bound before him, his expression thunderous. Sheriff Walton wore a smug smile that sent a chill down Rose's spine. Unable to hear their conversation, she could only watch as Klaus gestured emphatically, his posture radiating authority despite his injury. After several tense minutes, Walton dismounted and approached Klaus. The two men stood toe-to-toe, neither backing down. Finally, to Rose's relief, Walton signaled to one of his deputies, who cut Jack's bonds. The ranch hand rubbed his wrists, glaring at the lawmen. More words were exchanged before Walton and his men remounted and rode away, leaving Jack with Klaus. The two men spoke briefly before Jack headed toward the bunkhouse, and Klaus returned to the house. What happened? Rose asked as soon as he entered. Emmett and the others confirmed Jack was with them all day when the robbery occurred, Klaus explained. Even Walton couldn't ignore 7 witnesses. But he made it clear this isn't over. Because of me? Rose asked, guilt washing over her. Because Walton's a small man with a badge that makes him feel big, Klaus corrected, drawing her into his arms. Thomas nestled between them. But he'll think twice before bothering my family again. Your family, Rose repeated, savoring the word. Yes, my family, Klaus affirmed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. If you'll have me. I will, she promised, her heart full to bursting. 2 weeks later, on a crisp September morning, Rose Remington became Rose Henderson in a simple ceremony performed by the circuit preacher in the parlor of the ranch house. Jack and Emmett served as witnesses, while Thomas watched from the arms of Dr. Patterson, who had made the journey from Silver Creek especially for the occasion. I never thought I'd be performing another wedding in this house, the doctor remarked afterward as they shared a celebratory meal. Klaus, after Anna passed, you were so withdrawn I feared for you. Klaus glanced at Rose, his eyes warm with affection. Sometimes life gives you a second chance when you least expect it. That evening, after the guests had departed and Thomas was sleeping soundly in his new nursery, formerly Klaus's study, hastily converted for the purpose, husband and wife stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson. No regrets? Klaus asked, his arm around Rose's waist. She leaned into his embrace, feeling truly at peace for the first time since Tom's death. None. This is where we belong. There will be challenges, he warned. Ranching isn't an easy life, and Walton may still try to make trouble. I'm not afraid, Rose said with quiet confidence. Not anymore. Klaus turned her in his arms, his expression serious. I want you to know that I'll never try to replace Thomas's father in your memory. Tom will always be a part of him, and of you. Rose reached up to touch his face, moved by his understanding. And I'll never ask you to forget Anna. She helped make you the man you are, the man I love. His arms tightened around her. How did I get so fortunate? I ask myself the same question, she admitted. When I came here, I was desperate and afraid. I never imagined finding love again, much less building a new family. From inside the house came the faint sound of Thomas beginning to fuss. Klaus smiled. Speaking of family, I believe our son is calling. Rose's heart swelled at his words, our son. As they turned to go inside, she remembered that day months ago when the sheriff had first come to the ranch, how Klaus had stood firm against the threat, protecting her and Thomas without hesitation. You know, she said as they crossed the threshold into their home, that day when you paid my debt to Thornton, that was when I first began to hope that maybe, just maybe, Thomas and I had found not just shelter but a home. Klaus paused, drawing her close once more. You said something to me that day that stuck with me. You said you didn't need a guardian. I remember. Well, I don't want to be your guardian, Rose. His eyes held hers, filled with promise and love. I want to be your partner, Thomas's father, and the man who spends the rest of his life making sure neither of you ever feels alone again. As Thomas's cries grew more insistent, Rose stood on tiptoe to kiss her husband. That sounds perfect, she whispered against his lips. Now, let's go tend to our son. Hand in hand, they walked toward the nursery. Two souls who had found each other amidst grief and hardship, now united in a love that would carry them through whatever challenges the frontier might bring. For Rose, who had once whispered to her newborn son that it was just you and me now, the circle of love had expanded to include a man who had chosen them as his family. And for Klaus, who had believed his heart died with Anna, life had granted an unexpected second chance at happiness. As they reached the nursery door, Klaus squeezed Rose's hand. Remember what I said that day you arrived? That some things are worth the risk. Rose nodded, understanding flowing between them. You and Thomas, he said simply, are worth everything.